Hello friends, I have a short story for you. It ties up with an earlier one, same character. This is called More Than a Paper. Paul Kendrick, nicknamed Rocket Boots, left the shop at 6:30 a.m. with speed on his bicycle. Like many 1960s schoolboys, he was out to deliver morning newspapers. By 7:15 he was already in St Mary's Road in his Somerset town of Frome. He loved the early morning air, everything undisturbed before most people had even had a cup of tea. Of course, the customers were amusing. Some could never be pleased. Last week, Mrs Vickers had complained because her Western Daily Press had raindrops on it. Did she think he could perform miracles in a thunderstorm? He wanted to tell her to ask Jesus to deliver her papers, but he resisted the temptation to be cheeky just for once. Today, in the bright morning sunshine, with the birds singing with pure joy, nobody and nothing would annoy him. He pedalled hard to get to Styles Hill, whistling loudly the Beatles song She Loves You, and stopped at the Baileys. He was once very afraid of their dog, a male German shepherd, but now Major and him, they were best mates, and he either shared a sweet or patted the animal, who was always sitting waiting for him at the gate. Posting through their door, the Guardian, the Women's Own, and young Pete's copy of the Beano, he heard Mr Bailey shout, "Thanks, Paul, you're about bright and early today." A word of thanks made him even happier. As he got to his bicycle again, he met Betty Mason walking. She often was walking and always greeted him cheerily. She lived a few doors up the road and Paul walked with her. "I couldn't sleep last night, young Paul, so once the sun was up I took a walk." He handed her her Daily Mail, and as he rode on he felt sorry for her, alone now, and the family all far away. He was soon along the road, outside the town limits, and up the track that led to this house, a little run down, and it was the one house he delivered papers to that was outside the town. But it was here he often stopped for a quick cup of tea. The elderly Irishman who lived here was what Paul's mum would call a rough diamond. At first he seemed rough and tough, but he had a very kind heart, and Paul loved his stories about the Easter Rising in Dublin, the Irish Civil War, and years working for British Rail. Pat O'Kane was his favourite one of all of the customers he delivered to. The stray cat that Pat fed eyed Paul warily as he peered through the window. Pat always met him at the door, but he could see nobody, so he went round the back of the house, and he wasn't in the vegetable patch. Paul cupped his hands to stop the glass reflecting, and through the kitchen window he was alarmed to see his old friend laying on the floor, a broken cup fallen beside him. The back door and front door were locked, so Paul ran across the field, scattering the cattle grazing there. He reached the farmyard and a voice called out, "What do you want?" in an unfriendly manner. "Quick, phone an ambulance for Pat O'Kane, he's lying on his kitchen floor." "Drunk, I expect." "That's a lie. Phone quick or I'll tell the cops you wouldn't bother." Paul was angry. When the policeman on a motorcycle arrived just before the ambulance, the policeman broke the back door open, and soon the poor unconscious man was on a stretcher on his way to hospital. The policeman assured Paul that Pat was still breathing. As he finished his round, Paul had Pat in his head. He remembered how on a very snowy morning he'd given Paul tea laced with a little whiskey. "To warm you up, son." Paul had a job hiding his slight intoxication at school that morning. Pat had two passions, Irish music and Liverpool Football Club, and Paul shared the passion for Liverpool. Pat had given Paul much encouragement with his long distance running too, and had even come to watch him coming forth when the county championships were held at Selwood School in town. Paul had been so thrilled that his old friend had made the effort to come and see him. Pat had some great sayings, and as Paul rode home he remembered some. "Life is like your running, Paul. It takes endurance to have success." Several times he held up the paper that Paul delivered and said, "This is much more than a paper, Paul. This is a window on the world, and on the gangsters that run it." Another favourite was, If you can't do a person any good, young friend, then made you do them no harm. One morning, as they watched the kestrel hovering over the fields, Pat had said, "Oh, there is a God, Paul. He's invisible, and you won't find him in those big fancy churches now. But look at nature the right way and you can see God everywhere." Paul arrived at school a little late, but his explanation was readily accepted. He had real trouble concentrating, and when at lunchtime the headmaster's secretary let him phone the hospital, they would only tell him that Pat was in intensive care, giving no further information to a person who was a non-relative. However, when Paul left for school at home time, his mother was waiting for him at the gates, and he knew poor Pat was dead. The sudden stroke had killed him. Keeping his emotions in check until he was home, Paul went to his room and cried as he hadn't since he was about 6. The funeral was a gloomy affair. The sad old priest threw soil into the grave at the end of the ceremony after Pat had been lowered, and prattled on as if he was reading the football results. Paul looked at the handful of people present, and he realised that he was the only one who was really cut to the heart. Pat's mum was very understanding and chatted to him much, encouraging him to talk about the old Irish lovable rogue. It was some days later that a letter arrived for Paul, but in the care of his parents. It was a request that he attend the office of Peter Doxey, solicitor, in the company of one of his parents the next Friday afternoon after school. The solicitor was a somewhat genial middle-aged man with a round face and red cheeks. He took off his glasses and held up a sheet of paper in front of him. "Well, young man," he said, "I have heard all about you and how you are kind. Your kindness to an old man is about to be rewarded very amply. I'll read you this will in a moment and give you a copy, but I want to make it plain to you without all the legal jargon that us legal bods like to use. Basically, you are the sole beneficiary of Pat O'Kane's will." He passed a gold watch and a wad of notes over his desk. "These are yours right now. But the house and 12 acres of land around it are yours at 18. Pat rents them out to a local farmer. I'm to manage the land until then, when you're 21. But that is not all. Pat O'Kane came here in the 1930s. He came from a family that owned land on both sides of the Tyrone-Monaghan border. However, he had strong views, and he upset the wrong people, and he had to flee to England for safety. When his old father died, Pat was the only surviving child, and he inherited much land. But feeling unsafe if he returns, he sold it for a good price, made very wise investments, and has a capital sum of close to £3 million. You were to receive just £100 a month from now until you're 30. But once you're 30, all of it becomes yours, plus any interest that accumulates between now and then. I've got control of it, but am to give you regular reports on how it's being used to continue to make money for you. And then when you reach that age, you receive the lot. Pat made regular and hefty donations to Oxfam and to a local children's society, but still he's used his time well to accumulate so much capital. And he said this, waving the piece of paper. Pat said, "It's more than just the paper. This is a window of opportunity for you." Paul was stunned. His mother was faint and they had to get her a cup of tea. Mr. Doxey sat with his arms folded and a beaming smile, so delighted to be able to bring good news to someone. As they walked home, his mother said, "Well, Paul, I guess you'll be giving up that paper round now." Paul surprised her. "No way, Mum. That's how I met Pat. He wouldn't want me to give up. He'd want me to continue. He'd say, 'It's good for your endurance, son.'" Hope that was interesting for somebody. I was at a funeral today and I thought it was a good story to read today. Funerals are sad, but there is a bright future, good things to look forward to. And sometimes a story with a little bit of good news in it is nice, isn't it? Hope you're all well, my friends. Love and peace to you from Kate and myself. Bye for now. Bye bye.